Welcome, fellow freaks, geeks, and nostalgic 90s nerds to my channel, Slime and Slashers, where, yeah, we talk about everything from Nickelodeon slime to horror movie slashers. And sometimes we just do fun book tags, which is what today's video is all about. So I'm very excited because I've never done a book tag before. So without further ado, we'll go to this short intro, and when we come back, we will be into my very first book tag. Okay, I can't wait. See you back here in just a second. Welcome back, guys! I'm so pumped. I can't believe I've never done a book tag video yet. I will say there are a few that I have to do that I haven't done yet. For instance, my friend Pax Panic, she tagged me in one that I'm super excited about. It's like, I think it was something about, booktube jail. So like, all these different questions about which booktuber would you want to be in this situation with? And I am very excited about that one too, which will be coming up very soon. I just didn't have time to fit that in this month. I'm thinking maybe next month. However, this tag that I'm doing today was created by my friend Olly over at CriminOlly. And I would suggest that you guys go check out his channel. Very good videos there. I just really started to get into his channel kind of recently, but it's really good stuff. I saw a part of a library tour he did the other day. Some nice vintage horror, and some British vintage horror like covers that you don't usually see when you're looking like at American booktubers. I mean, some American booktubers have these covers, it's just that it's hard to get them, and I don't have a lot of British covers, so it was awesome seeing part of his tour, which he's got a couple of sections up right now on his channel. But again, this is his original tag, and it is so creative. When he tagged me in this, I was so just over the moon about it because I thought the idea was so cool. So the book tag is called the Birth Year Book Tag, and it's all about books that came out or were published, essentially, the year you were born. So I actually looked up even books, like, have I read any books from the year that Olly was born? Just to see if I read books from like a whole bunch of different years. We'll get there when we get there, but let's start with his actual questions. Because it's all supposed to be about my birth year and like little moments in my lifetime. So let's go on with his questions. And again, I do encourage you to check out his channel, and I will link his channel below, and I will also link his tag video below to where he put out this tag for the first time. His answers are awesome. Alright, so his first question is, have you read any books published in the year you were born? If so, what's your favorite and why? And I thought this answer would be no, because I actually haven't read a huge number of books. I just started to get into reading a few years ago. Now I have read books throughout my life for school, and there's been a few for pleasure, but really reading for pleasure has amped up for me starting in, I would even say, I think it was late 2019, maybe early 2020, but not very long ago is the point. So there's not a huge pool of books to choose from, and that's why I was thinking I probably haven't read anything from the year I was born. Which, by the way, 1989, baby! I was alive for the whole 90s. Barely. I was right there. But I will say I was born on January 13th, 1989, a Friday the 13th. And it's funny, Olly seems to not like the number 13, but that is, I was born on a Friday the 13th. And I think that's kind of cool, and also explains a lot of things, like why I'm so flippin' weird. In a good way. So, there's a few things about my birthday year which are kind of fun facts, but in terms of books, I went through my Goodreads and found that I did read at least one book within the last 2 years that was published in 1989. And that book would be Walkers by Graham Masterton. And I've talked about this book a few times recently. It was my first and only, as of now, Masterton read, and I really enjoyed it. I wouldn't say it was a 5-star read, but it was decent. And I mean, really the best part about it, guys, come on, it's the cover. This dude is getting strangled by a brick wall. So I like that. I don't know, I like it. So this book was a blast, lots of gore, lots of people being like sucked into sidewalks and pulled into walls, and so their bones are breaking and almost like dissolving like in a really painful way, and all of that is described. So that is pretty neat. And I like it a lot. So that's the one official book that I've read recently that was published in 1989, my birth year. I did read, as a kid, a book that was published in 1989. It's called Chicka Chicka Boom Boom, and it is like a kid's book, and I very vividly remember the cover. I remember the pictures in it a little bit. I don't remember the story at all. It's obviously a kid's picture book type of deal, and I do still own it. It's in my parents' attic somewhere, but I have not gone to my parents since Olly tagged me in this, and it would be really hard to find, but I can show you a picture. So out of the two I read, of course Walker's would be my favorite because it's the one I actually remember. But coincidentally, I am currently reading 2 books, and this was not planned. I already started reading these before Olly tagged me. So I'm actually reading 2 books that were published in 1989 right now. So I'm not done, so I can't say are they a favorite or not, but I can tell you about them. Alright, so I'm currently reading Funland by Richard Lehman, which was published in 1989. I'm about, if I recall, I'm 145 pages in right now. It is a 410 page book, so I have a ways to go. I've taken a break on this because I'm doing a buddy read of this other book that was published in 1989 that I'll tell you about in a second. But yeah, pretty fun so far. From what I've researched, it's technically 1989, unless I'm somehow wrong. Alright. The other book I'm reading currently, that was published in 1989, my birth year, is Geek Love by Katherine Dunn. And I gotta say, so I prefaced my pick of Walker's as my favorite with saying it's my favorite that I've read so far. I honestly am thinking this could be a favorite right now. And I'm only... Let's see how many pages in. Of course, the page I turned to doesn't have a page number. I am 149 pages into this book, and there's still a lot to go. This book is flipping pretty long. It's over 300 pages. It's 348 pages long. So I have quite a bit to go. Almost 200 more pages. That's okay. I have marked so many things. You can see the tabs already. Like I'm a third into it, and I've got so many tabs marked. I am just freaking in love with this book. No pun intended, Geek Love. I'm in love with it. It's been a joy to read so far. I am reading this as part of my whole Kelsi's Carnival readathon, where I'm reading, books about freak shows and amusement parks and carnivals and circuses and clowns. This is about, a traveling carnival, and the family that runs that carnival, basically they will do anything it takes to keep the carnival afloat, including breed their own freaks. And you get to follow basically the entire family. You get to learn a lot about the characters and, if they are proud of, their deformities or not. And I just think it is really interesting, really fascinating, really grotesque in the kind of way that you can't look away, if that makes sense. You're reading and reading, you're like, oh my god, this is so out there and zany. But there's just so many wonderful passages. The way Katherine Dunn wrote this is marvelous. So I gotta say, I have a feeling, I don't want to speak too soon, but I think this could be a favorite, and this would be my official pick once I read it and determine if it's a favorite. This might overtake Walker's, but as of now, all I can say is Walker's is all I've really read, so it's Walker's. But I can't wait to finish this. Oh my god, it's so good so far. Alright, and the second part of Olly's #1 question is, if you haven't read any birth year books, which do you pledge to read in the next 6 months, and why have you chosen it? So although I have read one official book from 1989, I'm currently reading 2 more, I still have other plans to read more books from my birth year, and that's just coincidence as well. Stuff that I had already actually planned to read this year, so it all is falling into place. So I do have plans to read The Girl Next Door by Jack Ketchum, and I'm going to read that very, very soon. As in, I think I'm going to read it in March. Because March, I'm doing a whole theme of must-read March. And so here's the book. Or at least this is my edition. Of course, there's a way cooler old school edition that I do not have that I would love to somehow one day get and find. But yeah, this is all I have so far. I've heard so many insane things about the story that it's so hard-hitting and heart-wrenching that I'm so intrigued. I can't wait to get to it, even though I know it's probably going to destroy me. It is what it is. It's going to destroy me. I'm kind of excited about being destroyed emotionally. I don't know, I guess. Alright, and another book that I'm going to read fairly soon. And this is for a reading project I am doing with my friend Kat. We're reading basically either a king or more than one king, short story a month, or whole novel a month for every month of the year of 2022. The only basically criteria is that the story or book has to have been adapted into an on-screen version. So whether that be a TV show or movie, it has to have been adapted in some way. So from 1989, we are going to read The Dark Half, which we're going to read for the month of April. And April, actually, I'm going to mention this here because it goes perfectly with Olly's whole tag. I am doing a complete old school month of reading in April. And this is really cool because the whole idea behind Olly's book tag, from what he talked about in his video where he announced this tag and gave his answers, is that he just wanted to see, you know, how many books people have read that were kind of in between classics and then in between modern books. Because, you know, you hear a lot of people on BookTube talking about new releases. You hear a whole bunch of other people talking about classics, but very rarely do you see, except for the people I actually do interact with a lot, I do see them talking about stuff in the middle. We're talking about, like, you know, late 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s. In my opinion, that would be like in the middle area of types of books. And so in April, my goal is to kind of go off of Olly's wavelength. I had this idea like a couple of months ago. I want to make everything I read not current. So nothing can be, like, it's got to be basically 20 years old or older. And so I'm really excited because not only am I going to do this for my reads in April, but I'm going to also apply it to anything I watch in April. So The Dark Half will be part of that, and since it was published in 1989, it fits the criteria of being old school. But I mean, just to give you an idea, I'm going to stack my TBR with tons of paperbacks from hell type of reads. So anything that's like vintage horror, so 80s, 90s, even early 2000s would fit, like I said. 70s even. So I am thinking about a whole bunch of different options. I mean, I have a huge collection of old school vintage 80s and 90s horror paperbacks, specifically ones that are labeled paperbacks from hell, and so I could have a whole bunch of different options to choose from. So we'll see. I haven't formed the TBR, but things are percolating, you know. And I'm also going to read a ton of 90s vintage middle grade and young adult books. So I'm going to read Fear Street in April. I'm going to read tons of Goosebumps in April, and I'm so jazzed. And I'm also going to read Are You Afraid of the Dark books. Yes, books. I know it's a TV show as well, and that's what it's more known for, but I'm going to read Are You Afraid of the Dark books and compare them not only to the show Are You Afraid of the Dark, but I'm also going to compare them and see how they stack up against Goosebump books. Like, you know, which series is better? Cough, cough, I believe it's going to end up being Goosebumps because it's the more established book series and R.L. Stein's actually a good writer. Whereas I've read one Are You Afraid of the Dark book and it wasn't the greatest. We'll get there when we get there in April. We're going to dive into all of that stuff again. Fear Street, Goosebumps, Are You Afraid of the Dark? Ugh. And some of the movies I'm going to watch for that month are movies that I've been wanting to get to rewatching for a very long time. Most of it's going to be rewatches for me for April. But it's all old school, whether that's like old school kids or old school horror. All it has to be, the only criteria is old school. And this is going to be a readathon, guys, so if any of you are interested, please comment below. Again, old school April. And it's also going to be not only a readathon, but like I said, a watchathon. I might have prompts, I might not, we'll see. Anyway, so Olly, I'm on the same wavelength as you. I think it's important to read, like, you know, stuff that's not current all the time. And I do read current horror. In fact, in January, I read a lot, and we'll get there. One of the questions has to do with, like, the recent books I've read and, you know, what years they're from, but we'll get there when we get there. And lastly, another book I'd like to get to from 1989, but this will probably be next year or the year after. Book 2 of The Drive-In, it's called Drive-In 2 by Joe R. Lansdale. This is the complete collection, so it has books 1, 2, and 3 in it. I have already read 1. Book 2 was published in 1989, according to my research, and I'd like to obviously continue on with the Drive-In series as time goes on. And so, of course, that's something from 1989 that I would definitely like to get to at one point or another. Okay, now officially moving on to the next question. I'm already long-winded. Sorry, guys. This is, like, such an exciting tag to me. There's so many things that you could, like, talk about, and it's great. Alright, so the second official question that Olly put in his tag is, have you read any books published in the year you turned 18? So, I have read a few, in fact, a lot more from 2007. That's when I turned 18. I've read a lot more from that year than from my birth year, 1989. So books that I read that were published in 2007 include Heart-Shaped Box by Joe Hill, Flippin' Amazing Book, I really love that book. Of course, I'm a Harry Potter fan, so I did read Harry Potter and the Deathly Hallows, which is a fantastic book. This is kind of like my ashamed to admit that I've read it book. I have read Eclipse by Stephanie Meyer because when I was 18, I was super into that book series, Twilight. And so yes, I did read that. I have not read the new Midnight Sun book because I'm kind of out of that phase. Like, I'm not really into romance in books, and I really wasn't back then. Like, I know a lot of people I knew back then were into it, and I didn't read very much. I liked the movie at the time because my friends did, and my cousin Dana was reading the books, and so that's kind of why, like, I got on board with it or whatever. I was Team Edward, in case you were wondering. That's what I was back in the day. But yes, I read all 3 books, and it was fun at the time. But now, we'll get to what my favorite was, but I'm just giving you a spoiler. Eclipse will not be my favorite book that I read that was published in 2007. It's not my favorite at all. Alright, and finally, another book I read from that year. I've read this a long time ago. This was back when I was in college. I didn't read it the year it was published, but I read it just a few years after it was published. So, The Chris Farley Show, a biography in 3 acts, and that one's very special to me. I'm a big Chris Farley fan, and he's just marvelous. I say he's, like he's still here. He was a great guy. R.I.P. Chris Farley. Just so full of life, but also had a dark side in terms of he was really tortured and pained inside, and the biography really touches on that. It's such a good biography, like I can't even say enough about it, and I read it at a time where I didn't think I liked reading fiction, and so really, it's one of the few books that I read back at a time where I, wasn't reading for fun. And so that's why, another thing, it's stuck with me quite a bit. So the next part of Olly's question says, what was your favorite from the books you read from that year and why? Again, it's hard for me to pick a favorite because Heart-Shaped Box could easily be a favorite. Of course, I love Harry Potter, so I've liked every single Harry Potter book. So Harry Potter and the Deathly Hallows could easily be my favorite that I read that was published in 2007. However, the number one prize, the favorite award, can go to The Chris Farley Show. I still think about that book. In fact, talking about it now makes me want to reread it so bad. The funny thing is, I do not own a copy. I actually read it because I bought it for my friend Teresa, and I think I read it before I gave it to her, which I think that's kind of terrible, is to read someone's gift before you give it to them, but I was very careful with it. I really just fell in love with it, and I don't know why I didn't buy my own copy after that. I guess I just kept meaning to and then never doing it, but the reason I got it for her is because we always called each other Spade and Farley. So she was Spade because she's really dry and sarcastic and always smarmy, and I have said this multiple times, my aura, a lot of people think this, it's not just me saying it, is very Chris Farley-like, minus the drugs. So I'm really excited and out there and fat guy in a little coat without the drugs. So that is totally my vibe, and that's really how I am. So I think she even made me a birthday card for my 18th birthday in 2007. I remember this because her band played at my 18th birthday. She used to play in a ska band, and I loved ska music, and I still do. Her band was called Angry Banana, and yes, they played for my birthday party along with another band as well. I also had a really great ska band play at my 16th birthday party, but back to the 18th, Teresa made me a card for that year, and it was all these Ace Ventura quotes, and then she said, "To Farley, love Spade," and she put a picture of David Spade on that side of the card, it was from David Spade, because that's what we called each other back then. So yes, she totally embodies the vibe of David Spade. She's so Spade. I mean, I hardly ever call her that anymore. I just usually say, dude, with a lot of O's when I message her. I'm just dude. Never Spade anymore, but I love that nickname. So back to the book for a second before I move on. The book is formatted kind of like Live from New York, if you guys have ever heard of that book. That book is written, it's basically a whole bunch of interviews that were transcribed, and every little section of the book has parts of each interview, from different people. So they might have a quote from Chris Rock, they might then have a quote from flippin' Bill Murray, or so it's basically little snippets from interviews compiled together in story form. And the Chris Farley book is formatted just like that. So, it's got people in the beginning of his life when they're talking about his childhood, It's got friends from his school years. It's got his family members that are interviewed. So it's got little parts of their interviews written there. And it flows so well. You would think that that format could be kind of choppy, but it's not. It's really, really well done. And then, of course, when you get into the SNL years, you've got quotes from people he worked with at SNL, and then people he worked with in his movie career, and so on and so forth. And yes, I believe David Spade is quoted in the book. I really have to reread it. It's been too long, and I not only consider it my favorite book from 2007 that was published in that year that I read, I think it's one of my favorite books of all time, period. And since I read it, I've read so many more books in addition to that, but it still sticks out in my mind. Like, for instance, I have this like vivid memory of being in a history class in college, and I was sneak reading, like hiding that I was reading a book underneath my like college desk in the classroom. And like I mean, the classes in college aren't even that long. It's not like you're in class the whole day. But like for some reason, I could not wait till after class was over to keep reading this. So, and it was an easy class that I didn't need to really pay attention for. I knew I could like get the notes later or read whatever we had to do later. I was reading like under my desk, and there was a part where I had to stifle my laughter, is where he was talking about being on a frozen lake. I mean, he wasn't talking about it, but people were talking about Farley, like doing all these shenanigans on a frozen lake, making people laugh. He was like sliding on the flippin' ice. Just the way they described it, I almost cried laughing. And then there's other moments in the book where you almost tear up, like, because it's sad. And so it really has everything. And if you are a fan of Chris Farley or SNL, I highly recommend this book. And you know, the funny thing is, I used to be so into biographies and autobiographies. I used to think that was all I liked to read, was like nonfiction books. Like another one of my favorite books ever is Inside Pee-wee's Playhouse, which is all about the true story of Pee-wee's Playhouse, the TV show, which is one of my favorite like old school kids shows of all time. Very just revolutionary for kids television, in my opinion, in that it appealed to adults too at the time, and like young adults specifically, which I think is so awesome. And it just tells you that that show was so ahead of its time and so artsy and really kind of hip. I hate to use that word, but at the time, I guess young people did consider it hip because they watched it. And it was technically a kid's show. So anyway, I used to love nonfiction, but now all I read really is fiction. So it's just funny how I haven't really read much nonfiction since then, but that one, even though now I'm into a whole different style of book, that one still holds such a big place in my heart. And I think that speaks volumes about the book itself and how well done it is. And also Chris Farley as a person and his whole story. By the way, there's some fascinating stuff about like his mental problems that he had. Like he had these fixations about certain things. He was actually very religious. You gotta read the book. It's a great book. I've got to reread it. I want to reread it by next year. I've already made the decision now. I'm going to reread it by next year, I think. Maybe it'll be like one of my first reads of 2023 or something. But yeah, I gotta reread it, obviously. It's going to be an amazing time. Alright, so I just happened to look up like popular books from 2007 that were published that year. And I do want to read eventually The Terror by Dan Simmons. And again, that would be really great, but that's not going to happen this year. There's no way. It's like a 700 and something page book. So in the future, definitely. And that would be another book that I could put on my list that I've seen from the year I turned 18. By the way, another Dan Simmons book that he wrote, but that was published in 1989, was Carrie and Comfort, and I actually would also love to read that one, so that would be another book that I would have read from 1989. But I don't think I'm going to get to either of those Dan Simmons books this year, so yes, for the future, I will have more books that I've read from the year I was born and the year I turned 18, but Dan Simmons, you're gonna have to wait. And I can't wait though, because I've heard so many great things about Dan Simmons' writing. Alright, third question in Olly's tag is, of the last 10 books you read, how many were published before you were born? And what were they? So, out of the last 10 I read, and I'm not including Geek Love or Funland because I'm literally in the middle of them, so those are not included. Only books that I have completed as of today, the day I'm filming this, which of course is February 7th. So, out of the last 10, 2 of them were published before I was born. So House of Illusions by Ruby Jean Jensen is actually the book I read last, and that one was published in 1988. And then earlier in the month of January, I read Slumber Party by Christopher Pike, and that was published in 1985. So those were my 2 books that were published before I was born, out of the 10 books I read last. But just to make a note of things, I actually did read more books that were older than just those 2. So 6 out of the 10 books I read last, so they're either 20 years old or even older. And most of them were published in the 90s. I'm big on reading 90s books, especially 90s middle grade, 90s young adult, but also I like 90s horror a lot. The next part of this question that Olly asked was, did you prefer the older books to the newer books? And honestly, yeah, mostly I do enjoy reading older books. I'm not one of those people who keep up with what's the new releases coming out this year. I know a lot of people who do. My friend Steph always keeps track of what's coming up new. I know booktubers who are like, books that are coming out in 2022 that I'm most excited about. Those are awesome videos, but I never seek those videos out just because I have so much old stuff that I have to catch up on. I'm like, man, I can't like spend all my time reading new releases and then I'll never get to the older books that I want to get to, and I'll never feel like, you know, I'm catching up with the older stuff that I feel like it's just essential reading that I need to get to, in my opinion. So it's just a matter of kind of preference. And my preference does tend to lean towards the 90s. I will say even the early 2000s, or even like early 2010s, I seem to read a lot in that area too. I do tend, like I said, to enjoy the older reads, just because that's my style, that's my vibe. I like old horror. It's a lot of fun. However, I will say recently in January, I read a lot of new stuff that was pretty great, like The Mud Ballad by Joe, I forgot her last name, but I'll put a picture of it. It was a great read, and that was more recent, and it's also, by the way, I didn't know this, I read it in January, but it would fit in for my February readathon because it does have like a freak show element to it, so it would apply to my readathon that is going on right now. But yes, that was a great newer read. Of course, Don't Call It All was a great book by Robbie Miles, which is newer, and that's kind of in the style of Goosebumps, but modern, so it's a middle grade book, and, you know, that was really enjoyable as well. So the newer books have a fond place in my heart as well, but I think I have like a huge soft spot for old school stuff, just in general. We're talking about movies, TV, and flippin' horror books, and books in general. Alright, so that brings me to the next question, which is actually movie related. And this is so fun that Olly threw this in here, because a lot of booktubers only talk about books, but he did make the point of, he thinks more people have seen older movies versus reading older books. And I kind of agree with him there, because I've actually watched a ton of older movies from the year I was born, so... And I say older, I know I'm not like on the older end of the spectrum, but I mean, 89 is 33 years ago. I'm 33. It seems like a long time to me, so that's a while ago, I guess. Alright, so his official question is, what's your favorite movie from your birth year and why? This is so hard for me. I am first and foremost a movie buff. I have grown up loving movies. Books is a new passion, but movies have always been there since I was like 5 years old. Maybe even earlier. It's basically one of the things I enjoy most in the world, and I actually thought I wanted to be a director for a very long time, but I didn't go in that direction. I did go to school, technically for film. I don't want to call it film school because it was just a regular college that had a really good film program, but I didn't completely go through the film program. I kind of stopped, like, you know, early in my junior year, so I didn't even get to the part where you make a lot of movies and stuff. It was mostly just, like, learning about theories and all of that stuff, which I actually really like that element of film, is, like, talking about film, learning about film theory, learning about, like, you know, the basics, the lighting, like, you know, the ideas behind the making of the film. When it comes to making film, like, that's not my jam. I'm not good at it. That's what I discovered in film school, and so that is why I'm like, I've got to change course right now. Like I said, it's so hard because there's so many good movies. Like, just to give you an idea of some movies that were released in 1989, Say Anything, which is one of my favorite romances, and I'm not a big romance person, but, I mean, John Cusack, flippin' holding the boombox, like, you can't go wrong. Like, that is classic to me. So yes, you gotta shout out Say Anything. It was a wonderful movie. Another kind of romance movie, but more of a nostalgic movie in general, is Teen Witch. And Teen Witch is so cheesy and corny and over the top, but, you know, it's hard to top that in terms of how cheesy and great it is, and it gives you this great nostalgic feeling when you watch it. So I owned it on DVD. I freaking love it, and I'm not gonna apologize for it, because yes, it's so kind of dated, but in the best way. It's so marvelous. So yes, Teen Witch I gotta shout out. Of course, other great movies. The Burbs, flippin' incredible. And a very esteemed movie was also released in 1989, Dead Poet Society, of course with the great Robin Williams. I very much like that movie. Then we've got another nostalgic kind of family movie, Troop Beverly Hills, which I did love growing up. I haven't seen it in many years, but that was fun for what it was. Not like a masterpiece, of course, not an Oscar winner, nowhere close, but still enjoyable for the type of thing it is meant to be. And then Christmas Vacation also came out in 1989, and it's not my favorite at all, but my dad, he would call that his favorite from 1989, I know for a fact. He's a big fan of flippin' Christmas Vacation. He's got a whole wall dedicated to that movie and the movie memorabilia when it comes to Christmas time. Like, he's got a whole wall decorated with just Christmas Vacation stuff. So those are all like kind of like fun little honorable mentions, but here are my official top 5 movies from 1989. At number 5, a movie that I just recently discovered. It's a slasher movie. It's called Intruder, and it's corny, and it's kind of got some bad acting, but it also has some really, really well done and creative shots. And I thought the premise and location of the film was really, really fun and unique, and I would recommend it if you're into cheesy slashers and you don't mind some kind of production quality flaws. However, there's some really strong points about the production as well. Like I said, the way they put the camera in certain places for shots, so like the framing of things in certain parts of the film are really cool and just something you don't see. So it's got some flaws, but it's got some pros in that area too. So yeah, I would say I recommend it, but watch at your own risk because it is a little corny. And it was like a newly discovered movie. I do talk about this movie at length in a video already up on my channel. I will link that video down below if you want to hear my thoughts on it. All right, number 4, my number 4 favorite film from 1989, Uncle Buck. So I mentioned Chris Farley. Another movie actor that I freaking love, that I wish was still around, would be John Candy. John Candy is a freaking gem of an actor, and I really wish he was still around. He is so magical when you watch him on screen. You just feel like you know him. I don't know. He's just got a presence about him, and he was taken from us too soon. I really love John Candy. So Uncle Buck has to be there. The great pancake scene where he makes these giant pancakes for Macaulay Culkin's character's birthday, and it's just such a fun movie. I would call it one of my comfort movies. I could watch that movie anytime. I haven't really seen it more than 6 or 7 times, but it's still a favorite from 1989 for me. Number 3, a movie that I own that I actually did discover in film school, which makes me sound super pretentious, but I don't think I would have discovered it maybe as quickly if I hadn't gone to film school. So this movie at the number 3 spot is called The Killer, and this was directed by John Woo, so it's kind of ridiculous and over the top with its action sequences because that's what John Woo is known for. We've got lots of gun fights and there's like a speedboat scene at one point. I don't know. I personally really like it. That's just me. And it stars the wonderful and amazing and incredible Chow Yun-fat. He is another one of my favorite actors, and I love him in almost anything. Like Anna and the King, the newer version, so good. Freaking Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon, amazing. And then when you look at some of his like foreign films, The Killer is one of the foreign ones, of course. That one has subtitles, so if you watch it, you'll have to be reading, but it's so good nonetheless. But if we're talking about his other ones, like I know specifically one of my favorites is called Once a Thief, and I actually have a poster of that one, which I've got to find. I don't know where I put it, but it's in my old room at my parents' house. But the movie is so good. The production quality is so interesting. Like there's all these colors and like really dramatic scene settings and like the way things are framed and edited. Lots of good stuff in that movie. I could go on and on about movies, so I'm sorry that I'm going on so long about all of this. But I think The Killer should be more recognized, and I think people should like go and check it out, especially if you are a fan of action-y movies. It's just underrated as hell. And Chow Yun-fat, like, he plays it with, like, of course, like, there's a lot of action, as I said, but he plays it with heart as well. And number 2. This could have easily been number 1, but I kind of went back and forth. This is number 2. So, The Little Mermaid. Of course, this is Disney's animated movie, The Little Mermaid. I am a huge, huge fan of old school traditional animation. That means hand-drawn animation, non-computer generated. Now, movies that I love, like Beauty and the Beast, do use computer elements for some scenes. Like in Beauty and the Beast specifically, you see this part where they pan up to the ceiling during the wonderful slow dancing part, and you see, like, you know, angels up above and just beautiful designs up in the ceiling. And that was done with computers, partially. And so, yes, I understand that some 90s animated films do use non-hand-drawn elements. However, I do tend to gravitate towards the movies that are more hand-drawn versus today, where you've got, like, Frozen, which I did not like. I know a lot of people like that movie, so please don't hate me. It's an unpopular opinion. I'm not a big fan. The message was okay, but, like, it's just not the Beauty and the Beast. It's just not. So, to me, like, Beauty and the Beast is probably one of the greatest animated movies of all time, and coming in behind that, that's why this is not number one, even for 1989. Little Mermaid is wonderful, is amazing, has an amazing banging soundtrack, but it's like, you know, not got as good of a story as Beauty and the Beast. So I don't feel too bad as putting it number 2, even though, like, I'm comparing it to Beauty and the Beast. Beauty and the Beast was released in, like, 1981, not 1989. But I'm just saying, like, Little Mermaid wouldn't be my number 1 out of animated films, and it's not my number 1 out of 1989 in general. For some reasons, like, you know, it could have had a better story, but overall, it's still one of my favorites of all time. I rewatch it over and over again. I've seen it like 100 times probably. I have it on VHS still as well. And I just want to shout out some other animated movies that were also released in 1989 that are fantastic. They're not on my top 5 list because I only wanted to choose one animated movie. I wanted to limit myself because I knew I would go ham with animation if I didn't. So other great animated movies from 1989, I wish I could speak today, from 1989 are All Dogs Go to Heaven, which is a film directed by Don Bluth. A lot of people think it's a Disney movie. It is not. It is dark, and Don Bluth is known for being more dark than Disney. And if you watch All Dogs Go to Heaven, or if you've already seen it, you know what I mean. And the second animated movie that's my honorable mention is Little Nemo Adventures in Slumberland. Box office flop at the time. Went through a lot of different directors, went through a lot of different production problems in general. Mickey Rooney voiced one of the characters in it. The reason I call it one of my kind of favorites or honorable mentions is because it is super creepy. It's got a great atmosphere to it. It's got a carnival type of feeling to it. Even though it's more about like a slumber, like dreamlike land, there are like elements to it like clowns and like juggling like circus animals. And anyway, I should watch it this month actually. And I'm mentioning these creepy kids movies because I would consider both All Dogs Go to Heaven and Flippin' Little Nemo to be creepy kids movies that were animated. I'm mentioning that because part of what I'm going to do in April is I'm going to be doing a top 10 creepiest kids movies countdown list. And that's, of course, according to me. That's my personal top 10 when I get there. That's going to be my preferences, my favorites. There are probably other creepy kids movies out there that I don't know much about, but yeah. All Dogs Go to Heaven, pretty insane. I could talk about it right now, but I guess I'll save it for when I'm going to talk about it, maybe in that video, if it's going to make the list. I don't know. Anyway, part of it takes place in New Orleans, by the way. There is drinking, there is smoking, there is gambling in All Dogs Go to Heaven, and yes, it's a kids movie. I freaking love that movie. It's awesome. And in Little Nemo, the creepy part is there's like a nightmare land, and there's this like really terrifying nightmare king. So yeah, it's creepy. It's awesome. Alright, so those were the honorable mentions, and that was my number 5 through number 2 picks for favorite movies from 1989. What lands at number 1 for my favorite movie released in 1989? Well, it has to be the original Pet Sematary. I have seen that movie a zillion times. Yes, it could be cheeseball, but I really love it, and I think it's a wonderful movie, and I'm going to rewatch it this year, because Kat and I are reading Pet Sematary, and we're going to watch the 1989 adaptation, but we're also going to watch the newer adaptation of the story that was released not that long ago, just a few years ago. So yes, but the 1989 version, I've seen both adaptations already, and I will say nothing compares to the 1989 version. That's just for me personally. I know other people who have read the book and actually didn't like the 1989 version because they didn't think it was scary. I freaking love it, and it just holds a special place in my heart. Little Mermaid and Pet Sematary almost neck and neck, super close, but yeah, Pet Sematary gets the edge just because Little Mermaid overall isn't my favorite animated movie, so I felt like I could put it at number 2. Alright, and by the way, if Goodfellas was released just 1 year before, it would have made my list. It would have easily been my number 1 because Goodfellas is one of my favorite movies of all time, and that was released in 1990. So it just missed by a year. One of my favorite movies of all time, 1990. Not 1989. That's okay. Still, a lot of my all-time favorites are kind of in this 1989 grouping. Like I said, Little Mermaid would be an all-time, and Pet Sematary would definitely be an all-time, and those are both from 1989. Alright, and I know I've droned on, but here we are coming up to the final question of Olly's book tag. What's your favorite movie from the year you turned 18 and why? So just to reiterate, the year I turned 18 was 2007. That was my senior year of high school. crazy year. Lots of good movies came out that year too, and I've seen a good bit of them. So in 2007, just to give you an idea of some movies I really liked, Rec came out, you know, the horror movie Rec. I really liked that one, like Rec as in record. So, really good movie, very tense. I loved that movie. Disturbia, it's kind of a cheesy thriller movie. Of course, it's with Shia LaBeouf. Honestly, it's a comfort movie I still sometimes rewatch because it's just something you don't have to think about and something just kind of mindless and fun. So I like that movie. A more serious film, and honestly, really deep and thought-provoking film, but at the same time, a really depressing and sad, hard-to-watch film. The Diving Bell and the Butterfly. Great movie. Saw that a long time ago, probably soon after it was available, you know, to rent for the first time. I rented it from Blockbuster back then. I remember specifically, I believe. And yeah, it tore me up inside. It's such a good film. If you haven't seen it, I totally recommend it. I believe it has subtitles. It's been a while, but I still think about that movie sometimes. Some elements of it. It's a heart-wrenching story. Alright, and another great movie from 2007, King of Kong. And this is actually like a documentary type of movie. I don't know if it's all technically true or if they totally like embellished it, because it's all very cinematic when you hear the story play out about these two dueling gamers. It's about these guys basically trying to beat each other's score. I think it was on Donkey Kong. That's why it's called King of Kong. And so, yeah, they're kind of like this one guy is trying to beat this other guy's like all-time world record score on Donkey Kong. And it's like a rivalry between them. It's such a good documentary. I've seen it 2 times. But obviously, since I don't remember it that well, I should actually see it again. It is one of my favorites in a way, but it's not in my top 3. So for this one, I have a top 3 from 2007. Alright, so number 3, Across the Universe, which is a Beatles-inspired musical. The Beatles are one of my favorite bands of all time. I was notorious for liking them all throughout my childhood. Basically, my obsession started when I was about 6 years old. My parents and my grandparents and my aunts and uncles and like everyone I knew growing up would get me Beatles gifts every single year for my birthday or for Christmas. It would never fail. I would always have at least one Beatles gift from somebody every single year or every single occasion or holiday that you would get gifts for. And I love that because I have a huge Beatles collection now because of that. The Beatles are still a favorite, of course, and still an all-time favorite, but like I'm not as obsessed as I was when I was a kid. Like when I was a kid, it was intense, like the obsession level. Like my computer backgrounds, like on our first computer were Beatles. I listened to like everything Beatles all the time. I would rewind like the audio tapes when I had them on cassette over and over again. I would rewatch the movie Help on a Hard Day's Night over and over and over again. I've probably seen those movies like a billion zillion times. Not like literally, but definitely I've watched both Help and A Hard Day's Night probably over 150 times each, and I'm not exaggerating. Like, that is probably accurate. So, Across the Universe, because it's Beatlesy, I don't know how you would say that, and also because it's really well done, production quality-wise. Actually, you know, my friend Kat and I talked about Across the Universe. We had a whole musicals type of marathon last year in 2021, so I will link that chat down below. We talk about Across the Universe and a whole bunch of other different things. She rewatched it, I did not. So it lands at number 3 on my list for favorite movies from 2007, but if you had asked me in 2007, I would have told you that my favorite movie from that year would have been Across the Universe, because I went and saw it in the theater 3 different times. By myself in one case or 2 cases. I know I saw it maybe like with a group of friends, then I went back 2 more times and saw it. That's how much I loved that movie. And I still think about it because some of the versions of the songs are even better than the original Beatles songs. I know that sounds like blasphemy, but they did such a good job kind of interpreting the songs and making it into a larger story and just making the songs very catchy for like a more modern audience. But of course I love the originals just as much, if not more, in most of the cases. But yes, that's number 3 technically. But back in the day, it would have been easily my favorite movie from that year. Things have changed a little bit since then. So number 2, 30 Days of Night. Such a unique vampire film. Very well done. Very different. Very creative. Very scary. really one of the ones that really gets to me, gives me goosebumps. Totally recommend it if you haven't seen it. That would be my number 2 favorite from 2007. And finally, my number 1 favorite from 2007, Sweeney Todd. Funnily enough, it's another musical, or a movie musical, whatever you want to call it. Of course, this stars Johnny Depp and a whole bunch of people from Harry Potter, and I did watch this for the marathon that I referenced with Kat. So we did talk about this in our musical marathon chat, which I've already linked down below, like I told you. So if you want to hear me talk about Sweeney Todd, and you want to hear us both talk about Across the Universe, go check that out, because at length I talk about that and a few other musicals, like I believe we talked about the movie Help, which was the Beatles movie I referenced, which would be a musical as well. We talked about Flippin' Grease. We talked about The Wizard of Oz a little bit. I wish I would have talked about it more. But we talked about Flippin' Mamma Mia and all kinds of random stuff. We talked about Labyrinth a little bit. And we talked about Hello Dolly, etc., etc. It was filled with a lot of musicals chat. We even talked about Buffy, the musical episode of Buffy, Once More with Feeling, and also the musical episode of Scrubs. So there was some TV talk in there too. But yes, Sweeney Todd has to take the cake as of right now. If you ask me today, Sweeney Todd is my favorite movie from 2007 for sure. Okay, and just for fun, so I was wondering, have I read anything from the year that Olly was born? So, Olly was born in 1973. I don't feel bad saying that because he already talked about his birth year. It's not like I'm talking about something that, like, he's trying to keep secret. He already talked about this in his own tag. So, I was like, have I read anything from, like, the 70s or even 60s or even earlier? And I looked, and I did, according to my Goodreads, which I tried to go back and mark stuff I even read in high school on my Goodreads. Vaguely stuff that I definitely remember I read. Now, if you ask me to tell you the plot, I don't necessarily know, but I know that there's books out there that I read, whether or not I remember the actual specifics of it. So, I haven't read anything from specifically 1973, but the funny thing is, I read things sandwiched all around 1973. So, all around Olly's birthday, or birth year, I read stuff around. So, I think that's kind of fun and coincidental. So, from 1971, I know that's going back 2 years, but I read The Exorcist, which is one of my favorite books of all time. I love The Exorcist. Then from 1972, just a year before Olly's birth year, I read The Halloween Tree by Ray Bradbury. And that was something that I read recently, last October 2021, and loved it. Alright, and so after Olly's birth year in 1974, some books I read from that year are Where the Sidewalk Ends, which is a wonderful, collection of kids' poems. Great stuff. I also read last year, in 2021, I read Let's Go Play at the Adamses, which was published in 1974, and I also read Jaws, which was published in 1974. So quite a few books all around his birth year that I read, but nothing from actual 1973. And funnily enough, I read stuff like even older than 1971, which was the earliest book I've mentioned here. But yeah, so I was like, have I read old stuff enough? But yes, and I like that, like, my reading is pretty varied, I feel pretty good about it. I feel like I'm a diverse reader for the most part. I like that because I try and strive to read a variety of things. I don't want to just keep reading current stuff, or current thrillers. It's important to me to get the old stuff in there, or the older stuff in there. It's not like super old or anything, but I just feel like it's important to be a well-rounded reader, and I think that's going to help me be that way. Now, I will say, most of everything I'm reading now is horror. That's not that well-rounded, but I am going to try to expand that, like, next year. This year is kind of all planned out for me. Like, I've got goals that I want to do for certain months with certain themes. But next year, I do think I want to, jump into more classics. I think I want to read Lord of the Rings, which I've been really wanting to read. I've read The Hobbit long ago, but I still got to get to Lord of the Rings. Of course, that's more fantasy. And so then I would be feeling good, like I'm branching out. And I do want to get to more nonfiction again, just like I used to read. So, a big goal for next year would be getting back to rereading that Chris Farley book, just so I could remember it and have a refresher, and actually buying a copy so I can flip and own it, There's actually a documentary based on the book that is really good, but it's not as good as the book itself. The book goes into way more detail about his life. So I would say if you want to check out one or the other, check out the book, because it's still one of my favorite books of all time, and I've read so much since I've read that, so yeah, it's a great book. Yeah, so just to give you guys a hint of the things I'm trying to aim at for next year, I am kind of keeping Olly's whole mindset in mind, and even before he mentioned it, I had this mindset, like, I want to get into more, older stuff, and, like, I was already thinking about that for April, like I said. If you guys are wanting to join in for Old School April, please shout it down below. Tell me some stuff that you'll be wanting to read or watch, and like, again, it won't be specifically horror in terms of the movies and TV I'll be watching for old school April. Like, for instance, I'm gonna watch E.T. That's not a horror movie, but it is an old school movie, and it's celebrating its 40th anniversary this year in 2022. I think that's an awesome excuse to rewatch it again. It's one of my favorite films ever. And so I can't wait to get to that. I'm probably also gonna watch some old school Disney Channel original movies, which are really not technically good movies, but they're very nostalgic for me, and they make me feel old school, or like, you know, like, it gives me like a time warp. And that's what the whole idea of old school April, whether it's you're reading stuff from before you were born, or just from stuff when you were like younger, or watching stuff from before you were born, or watching stuff from when you were just younger as well. It's all about just kind of, you know, embracing that old school classic-y vibe and, you know, older vibe. So I can't wait to dig into more older stuff as this year goes and as next year goes too. And I think all of that lends each of us, you know, a way to become a better, overall, well-rounded reader and movie watcher or TV viewer. So it depends on if you're just talking about books, if you're expanding it to talk about movies and TV, which I'm a big proponent for older movies as well, and older TV too. So anything old, I don't know, I guess I must like it. People have told me I'm an old soul trapped in a young person's body, and I have seen that before. It's like Chris Farley mixed with your grandma, or my grandma, or a grandma. Just like, that's kind of my vibe. Old and then ridiculously young, like a young spirit, but also a hyper spirit at the same time, mixed up, and that's me. Thank you so much, Olly, for tagging me in this fun, flippin', amazing book tag video, because I've really enjoyed answering all your questions, and I truly think this is a wonderful book tag idea. I think you came up with a great premise, and, you know, some book tags I don't really like too much. I'm like, I don't even know what I would answer, but this one, as soon as I saw you tagged me and I read the questions before I even saw your video, I was like, oh my god, this is going to be, like, so much fun. And I know you said, like, you know, I love a bit of nostalgia, and that is so true, and that's why I think I jumped for joy when I saw that I was tagged in this. So I gotta thank you again. It's been awesome answering this, and it gave me an excuse to make a really fun extra video that I wasn't even planning on making as of last week. It's so fun when things pop up that are just kind of more spontaneous and, you know, unexpected. Okay, editing Kelsi here, realizing that I did not tag anybody. I tag whoever wants to do this tag because I think it's a really fun tag, but I also want to specifically tag only if she wants to, because I know she hasn't made a video in a while, but Olivia from over at AV Reads. I feel like AV Reads, the channel is amazing. Olivia is so well read, and she reads more than just horror. So I'd really like to know what she's read from her birth year. And so if you want to, Olivia, please feel free to do this tag. If not, no worries. And please, whoever else wants to, take a go at it. Alright, sorry that I forgot to actually record this as part of the video, but it is what it is. Alright, so I also want to thank you guys as I close out this video. I really appreciate you tuning in if you're a longtime subscriber, and if you're new here, thank you as well. Please consider hitting that bell, that way you won't miss any of my videos. We talk a lot about books. That's what I'm mainly talking about recently, but I don't want you guys to forget that I also talk a lot about movies, specifically a lot about horror movies, but soon, coming up in March and April, I will be talking a lot about 90s movies in general and 80s movies too, that are non-horror related. So there's going to be a mix on the channel because that's always been my intent for the channel. So stay tuned if you like any of the above, because I will be covering all of that. But for this time, that's it for me. Till next time, you guys know what you can do. I say it every video. Keep on killing it. Thank you guys. Bye.